The fog was unusually thick that morning, curling in ghostly tendrils across the highway like it was trying to hide the world beyond. John Carter leaned forward slightly, squinting into the gray void as his truck's headlights barely illuminated the wet asphalt ahead. His blue Peterbilt, affectionately nicknamed Old Blue, hummed steadily beneath him, a sound he had come to associate with solace during his endless hours on the road. John adjusted the cap on his graying hair and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. At 48 years old, he was a man carved by time and miles, lines etched into his face like a map of his life's trials. His hands, calloused and weathered, told the story of decades behind the wheel. Since Catherine's death 5 years ago, the truck had become his closest companion, and the highway was the only home he knew. The silence inside the cab was broken only by the low strains of an old country song playing on the radio, the kind of melody that brought back memories he tried not to dwell on. Catherine had loved those songs. She'd hum them softly while folding laundry or tending to the garden, her voice full of warmth and life. John swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. Those days were gone. A sudden flicker of movement at the edge of his vision jolted him back to the present. He instinctively let off the gas, his eyes darting to the shoulder of the road. In the dim light, he thought he saw a shape, a blur of gold against the gray mist. His heart thudded as he peered closer, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. "What the hell is that?" he muttered under his breath. Slowing the truck, he leaned forward to get a better look. At first, he thought it was just another piece of debris, maybe a bag tossed carelessly out of someone's car. But as he drew closer, the shape shifted, and then he saw it. A dog. A golden retriever. She was lying on her side, her body curled protectively around something. John felt his gut twist as he noticed the small forms huddled against her. Puppies. 4 of them. Their tiny bodies squirmed weakly, their cries barely audible over the hum of the truck's engine. "Damn it," John whispered, his chest tightening. He knew the unwritten rule of the road: keep driving, don't stop unless you have to. But there was something about the scene in front of him that made it impossible to keep going. Maybe it was the way the dog's ribs were visible through her matted fur, or the way her eyes, wide and desperate, locked onto his truck as if begging for mercy. John pulled the truck onto the shoulder, the hiss of the air brakes cutting through the stillness. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the cold morning air. The fog clung to him, damp and heavy, as he approached the dog slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog flinched at first, but didn't move away. Her golden fur was filthy, tangled with mud and leaves, and her body trembled with exhaustion. The puppies pressed against her, their tiny forms shivering as they tried to bury themselves in her warmth. John crouched a few feet away, shining the flashlight closer. The dog's eyes, dark and glassy, met his again, and he felt something deep within him stir, a mix of anger and sorrow. "Who the hell leaves you out here like this?" he murmured, shaking his head. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the remains of a granola bar he'd been saving for later. Breaking off a small piece, he held it out to the dog. "Here, girl. You need this more than I do." She hesitated, her gaze darting between the food and John's face. After a moment, hunger won out, and she stretched her neck cautiously to take the offering. She swallowed it quickly, licking her lips as she glanced back at him, still wary, but a little less fearful. John glanced down at the puppies. They were no bigger than his hands, their fur damp and patchy. One of them let out a faint squeak, a sound so pitiful it made his chest ache. He knew he couldn't leave them here, there was no question about it. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "Well, I guess I'm late for that delivery." Walking back to the truck, John grabbed an old blanket from behind the seat. It was worn but clean, something he kept for emergencies. This certainly counted as one. Returning to the dog, he crouched down again, speaking softly. "All right, girl, let's get you and your little ones out of here." He carefully wrapped the blanket around the dog and her puppies, lifting them gently into his arms. She whimpered softly but didn't resist, her eyes never leaving his face. The puppies squirmed against her, their tiny cries muffled by the fabric. John carried them to the truck, placing them on the passenger seat. The mother curled instinctively around her pups, licking each of them in turn as if reassuring them that they were safe. John watched for a moment, his throat tight. The way she cared for them, even in her weakened state, reminded him of Catherine, how fiercely she had loved, how much she had given. Sliding back into the driver's seat, John started the engine. The cab filled with the familiar rumble of Old Blue, and the vibration seemed to calm the dog. She rested her head on the seat, her eyes still fixed on him. "What's your name, girl?" John asked, glancing at her. His eyes fell on the collar around her neck, a simple leather band, worn and frayed. There was no tag, no name, just a strange mark etched into the leather, a small circle with a line through it. It didn't look like any symbol he recognized. He frowned but pushed the thought aside. There would be time to figure that out later. Right now, they needed help. As the truck rolled back onto the highway, the fog began to lift, revealing the first rays of sunlight breaking through the gray. John glanced at the dog and her puppies again, his heart heavy but resolute. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice firm. "I've got you." For the first time in years, John felt a spark of something he hadn't known he was missing. Purpose. This wasn't just another delivery, another mile on an endless road. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that just might save him as much as he was trying to save them. The bell above the door jingled softly as John Carter pushed his way into Rachel's place, a small gas station tucked beside Interstate 95. In his arms, Bella, the golden retriever, lay limp, her golden fur wrapped snugly in a blanket. Her eyes blinked slowly, the exhaustion evident in her trembling body. Outside, her 4 tiny puppies were bundled together on the passenger seat of John's truck, safe but still weak. Rachel Miller, the owner of the gas station, looked up from behind the counter. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her flannel shirt bore faint grease stains from tending to the occasional mechanical emergency. Her usual cheerful expression vanished when she saw the bundle in John's arms. "John," she called, stepping around the counter, her tone tinged with concern. "What happened?" "I found her on the highway," John said, his voice heavy. "She's got 4 pups in my truck. They're not in great shape." Rachel closed the gap between them quickly, her hands reaching instinctively to touch the dog's head. Bella flinched slightly but didn't pull away, her eyes flickering open to meet Rachel's kind gaze. "Oh, sweetheart," Rachel murmured. "Let's get her settled. Come on." She led John to a back room that doubled as a break area for truckers and locals. The room was simple, with a worn leather couch pushed against the wall, a small table cluttered with coffee supplies, and a heater humming softly in the corner. Rachel grabbed a stack of old towels from a cabinet and spread them out on the couch. "Lay her down here," Rachel instructed, gesturing to the makeshift bed. John knelt carefully, placing Bella on the towels. She let out a low whimper as she shifted, curling her body protectively around an invisible circle, as if still imagining her puppies beside her. Her thin frame looked even more fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I'll grab some water and food," Rachel said, moving to a small kitchenette in the corner. "The pups okay out there?" "They're alive," John said, standing and stretching his back. "But they're weak, barely moving." Rachel frowned as she opened a can of wet dog food, the smell wafting through the room. "This poor mama," she said softly, setting the food aside. "I can't believe someone would just abandon her like that." After ensuring Bella was as comfortable as possible, John stepped outside to retrieve the puppies. The cold air hit him like a slap, and the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the quiet lot surrounding the gas station. He opened the truck door and looked down at the tiny forms bundled in the blanket. One of the pups let out a faint squeak, its frail body twitching slightly as it nuzzled closer to its siblings. John lifted the entire bundle gently, careful not to disturb them too much. As he carried the puppies inside, he caught sight of James Wilson, the station's mechanic, stepping out of the garage. The man, in his early 50s, had grease-stained hands and a gruff demeanor, but his heart was known to be as big as his toolbox. "What's going on, John?" James asked, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. "Found these little ones on the highway," John said, nodding toward the bundle in his arms. "Mama's inside with Rachel." James let out a low whistle. "Man, people are cruel. Need me to do anything?" "Not sure yet," John admitted. "Rachel's calling around to see if any shelters can take them, but she says they're all full." James shook his head. "Figures. Let me know if you need help with anything. Poor things deserve a chance." Inside, Rachel was already tending to Bella, gently coaxing her to eat small bites of food. The golden retriever hesitated at first, but eventually began to eat, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes followed John as he walked in, the bundle of puppies cradled against his chest. He knelt beside the couch and unwrapped the blanket, revealing the 4 tiny forms. Rachel gasped softly. "Oh, John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're so small." The puppies squirmed weakly, their soft whimpers filling the quiet room. Bella's ears perked slightly at the sound, and she tried to lift her head, though her strength failed her. "Easy, girl," Rachel said soothingly, placing a hand on Bella's head. "They're safe." Rachel reached for another towel and carefully picked up one of the puppies, examining it with gentle hands. Its fur was damp, and its tiny body was alarmingly thin. "They're dehydrated," she said. "We'll need to warm them up and get some fluids in them." She handed the puppy to John, who held it carefully in his large, calloused hands. The tiny creature trembled, its eyes barely open as it let out a faint cry. "Don't worry, little one," John murmured. "We'll figure this out." As Rachel worked to care for the dogs, she noticed something odd about Bella's collar. She leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she examined the leather band. "John, look at this," she said, holding up the collar. "Have you seen this mark before?" John leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he studied the faint circle with a line etched through it. "Not that I can remember," he said. "What do you think it means?" Rachel's expression darkened. "I don't know, but it doesn't look like a regular tag. It could be some kind of brand. I've heard stories about illegal breeders using marks like this to track their animals." John felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. The thought that Bella and her puppies might have been abandoned by someone who saw them as nothing more than property made his stomach churn. "We need to find out where she came from," John said, his voice firm. "This isn't right." Rachel nodded. "I'll call around, see if anyone recognizes the mark. In the meantime, we need to focus on keeping them alive." The hours passed in a blur as Rachel and John worked together to care for Bella and her puppies. James stopped by with a makeshift heating pad he'd rigged from an old engine heater, which Rachel tucked beneath the towels to keep the puppies warm. Bella, though weak, seemed to relax in the presence of the 2 humans, her trust slowly building as they tended to her. As John watched Rachel gently stroke one of the puppies, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't just the satisfaction of helping. It was the feeling of being part of something meaningful, something bigger than himself. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just drifting through life. "I don't know how I'm going to do this," John admitted quietly, breaking the silence. Rachel looked up from the puppy in her lap, her gaze steady. "You don't have to do it alone," she said simply. And for the first time, John believed her. The sun was higher in the sky by the time Rachel had finished tending to Bella and her puppies. The small gas station's back room was filled with the quiet hum of the heater and the occasional soft whimper from the puppies, who were now nestled snugly in a warm blanket. Bella, though still weak, seemed more relaxed. Her trust in the strangers caring for her was slowly beginning to build. John Carter leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. His gaze lingered on Bella and her tiny pups, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The strange mark on Bella's collar weighed heavily on his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just an odd design. It was a clue, one that might lead to the answer of why Bella and her puppies had been abandoned in such a desperate state. The mark. Rachel was seated at the small kitchenette table, the collar laid out in front of her. She had cleaned the worn leather, revealing the symbol more clearly, a small circle with a diagonal line running through it. The etching was faint but deliberate, as if it had been burned into the leather long ago. "Does this look familiar to you, Rachel?" John asked, stepping closer. Rachel shook her head, her brow furrowed in thought. "Not exactly, but it reminds me of something I've heard about before. You know those illegal breeding operations people talk about? Puppy mills? Sometimes they mark the dogs as property. It's like branding cattle." John's stomach tightened at her words. The thought of Bella being treated as nothing more than a commodity made his blood boil. "This isn't just some stray dog," Rachel continued, her voice quieter now. "Whoever did this didn't care what happened to her or her pups." John nodded, his jaw clenching. "We need to figure out where she came from." The mechanic's insight. James Wilson entered the room, his heavy boots echoing on the tile floor. He carried a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a small notepad in the other. "I did some digging," James said, handing the notepad to John. "Talked to a guy I know who's seen marks like that. Says they're used by breeders who work under the radar. Shady operations that churn out puppies without caring about the animal's health." John scanned the scribbled notes, mentions of overcrowded kennels, unsanitary conditions, and dogs discarded when they were no longer profitable. His grip on the notepad tightened. "We can't let this slide," John said, looking up at James and Rachel. "These people need to be stopped." Rachel nodded. "I'll put some feelers out. There are animal rescue groups around here who've been tracking this kind of thing. Maybe they can help." A viral post. Rachel pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos of Bella and her puppies, careful to avoid capturing any identifying details of the station or its staff. She uploaded the pictures to a local community group on social media, along with a brief description of the situation and a request for information about the collar's mark. "Hopefully this'll get some attention," Rachel said, her fingers flying across the screen. "People need to know this is happening." Within minutes, the post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, some offering support, others sharing similar stories of abandoned dogs with mysterious markings. A few mentioned a breeding facility called Golden Paws, a name that sent a chill down John's spine. "I've heard of them," James said grimly. "They shut down a while back, but no one knows what happened to all the dogs they had." John looked over at Bella, who had finally drifted off to sleep. Her puppies were snuggled against her side, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each shallow breath. "Maybe we just found some of them," John said quietly. Detective Daniels. Later that afternoon, as the small group was piecing together what little information they had, a black sedan pulled into the gas station's lot. The driver stepped out, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. He adjusted his tie as he approached the door, his expression unreadable. Rachel frowned. "That's Detective Mark Daniels," she said. "He works with animal welfare cases sometimes. What's he doing here?" John stood as Daniels entered, his sharp gaze scanning the room before settling on the collar sitting on the table. "I heard you found something interesting," Daniels said, his voice calm but authoritative. Rachel gestured for him to sit. "We think this dog and her puppies might be connected to an illegal breeder," she explained, pointing to the mark. "Do you recognize it?" Daniels picked up the collar, his brow furrowing as he examined the symbol. "I've seen this before," he said. "It's used by a group we've been investigating for years. They're known for running underground breeding operations and discarding animals that don't meet their standards." John's fists clenched at the detective's words. "So what happens now?" he asked. "We build a case," Daniels replied. "This dog and her puppies might be the evidence we need to shut them down for good, but we'll need to keep them safe and alive." A new purpose. As Daniels left to begin his investigation, the gravity of the situation settled over John like a heavy weight. Bella and her puppies weren't just victims, They were key to stopping a cruel and exploitative network. John knelt beside Bella, gently stroking her head as she opened her eyes and looked up at him. "You're not just fighting for yourselves anymore, girl," he said softly. "You're fighting for all the others like you." For the first time in years, John felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd known. He wasn't just a truck driver on an endless road. He was part of something bigger, a chance to make a difference, to save lives, and to bring justice to those who had none. The road ahead was uncertain, but John was ready. Together with Rachel, James, and Detective Daniels, he would do whatever it took to protect Bella and her pups, and to bring down the people who had left them to die. The quiet hum of Rachel's place was broken by the faint whimpers of Bella's puppies. The smallest one, a tiny golden-furred pup, was trembling harder than the others, his body barely moving under the blanket. Rachel knelt beside the couch, her experienced hands gently lifting the puppy for a closer look. Her expression darkened. "This little guy isn't doing well," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. John Carter leaned closer, his face etched with worry. "What's wrong?" Rachel set the puppy back down beside Bella, who instinctively nuzzled him closer to her body. "He's severely dehydrated, John, and he's not as strong as the others. If we don't act quickly, he might not make it." John felt a lump rise in his throat. The puppy was so small, barely larger than his palm. It was clear he was a fighter, though. The faint rise and fall of his tiny chest showed he hadn't given up yet. John wasn't about to give up on him either. A desperate attempt. James Wilson walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "How's it looking?" he asked, noticing the tension in the room. John shook his head. "The runt's struggling." Rachel looked up at James. "We need to get fluids into him, but I don't have the equipment here. Do you know anyone nearby who might?" James scratched his chin thoughtfully. "There's a vet clinic about 20 minutes from here. Small place, but I've heard good things. Want me to call ahead?" "Yes, please," Rachel said, her voice urgent. John gently picked up the puppy, wrapping him in a fresh towel. The tiny creature let out a weak squeak, his body limp in John's hands. Bella watched intently, her dark eyes filled with worry as her ears twitched at the sound of her pup's cry. "I'll take him," John said firmly, standing. "You stay here with Bella and the others. I'll make sure he gets what he needs." Rachel nodded. "Drive safe, and don't let them turn you away. They need to help him." The vet clinic. The drive to the clinic was tense. John kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other cradling the puppy against his chest, his heart pounding with every shallow breath the little one took. He couldn't help but glance down at the fragile creature, silently willing him to hang on. When he arrived at the clinic, he bolted inside, the bell above the door ringing loudly. A young woman at the reception desk looked up in surprise. "I need help," John said, his voice firm but desperate. "This pup's in bad shape." The receptionist nodded quickly, calling for Dr. Anderson, the clinic's veterinarian. Within moments, a tall, kind-faced man in a white coat appeared, his expression serious as he took the puppy from John's hands. "Follow me," Dr. Anderson said, leading John into a small exam room. The next several minutes felt like hours. John stood against the wall, his fists clenched as he watched the vet work. Dr. Anderson hooked up a tiny IV to deliver fluids, checking the pup's vitals with practiced hands. "He's critical," Dr. Anderson finally said, looking up at John. "But you brought him in just in time. We'll do everything we can." Waiting for news. Back at Rachel's place, Bella seemed to sense her pup was gone. She whimpered softly, nudging the blanket where he had been lying. Rachel knelt beside her, stroking her head. "He'll be okay, Bella," Rachel murmured. "John's got him." The other puppies were beginning to stir, their tiny cries filling the room. Rachel worked quickly to feed them with small syringes of warm milk, doing her best to keep their fragile bodies strong. Meanwhile, John paced the waiting room of the clinic, unable to sit still. His mind was racing with thoughts of the past, of Catherine, of all the things he couldn't save. But this time, he told himself, it would be different. He wouldn't let this little one down. Finally, Dr. Anderson emerged, looking tired but optimistic. "He's stable for now," the vet said. "We'll need to keep him here for a couple of days, but he's a fighter." Relief washed over John like a wave, and for the first time in hours he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. A name for a fighter. Back at the station, John walked in carrying the tiny puppy, who was now wrapped in a small medical blanket. Bella's ears perked up immediately, and she let out a soft bark as John placed the pup back beside her. She nuzzled him lovingly, her tail wagging faintly. "He's a tough little guy," John said, looking down at the pup with a small smile. "I think I'll call him Buddy." Rachel chuckled softly. "Buddy suits him. He's lucky to have you." John shook his head. "No, I'm the lucky one. These dogs, they're giving me something I didn't know I needed. Renewed determination." As the night fell over Rachel's place, the group gathered in the small lounge, watching over Bella and her puppies. Buddy, though still weak, seemed more stable, his tiny body nestled securely against his siblings. "I've been thinking," John said, breaking the silence. "This isn't just about saving them. There are more out there, more dogs like Bella and Buddy. We can't just let this keep happening." Rachel nodded. "Agreed. But first, let's focus on getting these little ones stronger. We can't fight this battle if we're not ready." John looked at Bella, who was now resting peacefully with her puppies tucked close. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Whatever it took, he was ready to fight for them. The atmosphere in Rachel's place was tense the next morning. Bella's puppies were growing stronger, but Buddy, the smallest of the litter, was still fragile. John Carter sat in the back room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, his eyes fixed on the little pup nestled beside Bella. She hadn't left his side since John brought him back from the vet. Buddy's shallow breathing was a constant reminder of the fragile balance between life and loss. Rachel Miller walked in, her phone in hand. "John, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and worry. "What's up?" John asked, setting down his mug. Rachel handed him her phone, the screen open to a social media post. The photos of Bella and her puppies had gone viral overnight. Comments poured in, with people sharing similar stories of dogs abandoned with strange markings. One name kept coming up: Golden Paws. "I've been digging," Rachel said, sitting down across from John. "Golden Paws was a breeding facility that closed last year, but there are rumors dogs just vanished. No one knows where they ended up." John's jaw tightened. "Maybe we do." A knock at the door. As Rachel and John pieced together the information, the sound of tires crunching gravel outside made them both look up. A black sedan rolled into the lot, its sleek body stark against the rustic backdrop of the gas station. The car came to a stop, and out stepped Detective Mark Daniels, his sharp suit a contrast to the gritty surroundings. Rachel opened the door before he could knock. "Detective Daniels," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "I saw the post," Daniels said, holding up his phone. "This is the break we've been waiting for. Golden Paws has been on our radar for years, but we've never had enough to take them down. This dog, Bella, and her puppies might be the evidence we need." John crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "What are you saying, Detective?" "I'm saying," Daniels replied, stepping into the room, "that we need to keep these dogs safe. They're key to proving the link between Golden Paws and a string of illegal breeding operations across the state." Connecting the dots. Daniels spread out a series of documents and photographs on the small table in the back room. Among them were images of other dogs with similar markings on their collars, reports of overcrowded kennels, and even testimonies from whistleblowers who had worked for Golden Paws. This isn't just about one facility, Daniels explained. They had partnerships with smaller breeders in neighboring states. When Golden Paws shut down, they offloaded their dogs to these places. The ones that didn't meet their standards, they were abandoned. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she picked up one of the photos. It showed a dog with a collar nearly identical to Bella's. "And no one stopped them?" she asked. "We've tried," Daniels said. "But without concrete evidence, it's been impossible to pin anything on them." John glanced at Bella, who was now resting with her pups, her body curled protectively around Buddy. "Well, you've got your evidence now," he said. "What's the plan?" The first threat. Before Daniels could respond, the door to the gas station opened again. A man in a dark jacket stepped inside, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He glanced around the room, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Bella and her puppies. "You the ones with the dogs?" the man asked, his tone casual but laced with something darker. "Who's asking?" John replied, stepping between the man and the couch. The man smirked, pulling a small business card from his pocket and tossing it onto the table. It bore the logo of a generic pet care company. "Just looking to take them off your hands. No need to make this complicated." Rachel picked up the card, her expression hard. "We're not handing them over." The man's smirk faded. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low. "Those dogs aren't yours to keep." John stepped closer, his voice firm. "You need to leave. Now." The man glared at him for a moment before turning and walking out. As the door closed behind him, John looked at Daniels. That was no coincidence. "No," Daniels agreed, pulling out his phone. "That was a warning, and it means we're on the right track." Preparing for the showdown. As the day wore on, the tension in the gas station grew. Rachel received several calls from strangers asking about the dogs, their questions eerily specific. Daniel set up his laptop in the back room, using his connections to trace the business card left by the stranger. It was linked to a shell company, one of many tied to Golden Paws. James Wilson joined the group later in the afternoon, his normally jovial demeanor replaced with grim determination. "I rigged up some extra locks for the doors," he said, setting down his toolbox. "Just in case." Rachel nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We're not letting anything happen to these dogs." John sat beside Bella, his hand resting gently on her head. She looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with trust. "We'll keep you safe," he promised, his voice barely above a whisper. The confrontation. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a convoy of vehicles pulled into the gas station lot. Daniels stood by the door, his hand resting on his holstered gun. John and James were inside, ready to defend Bella and her pups if necessary. The first person to step out was a tall man in a tailored suit. His silver hair was slicked back, and his expression radiated confidence. He was followed by several others, all dressed in similar attire. "You're making a big mistake," the man said as he approached the door. "I'm Richard Coleman, owner of Golden Paws. Those dogs are my property." Daniels stepped forward. "Not anymore, they're not. We have enough evidence to tie you to illegal breeding and animal cruelty." Coleman's smile didn't falter. "Do you? Or are you just wasting everyone's time?" Before Daniels could respond, Rachel stepped out holding a tablet. She played a video, footage from her security cameras showing Coleman's men scouting the area earlier that day. The smirk fell from his face. "That's enough to get a warrant," Daniels said, his voice cold. "And I suggest you leave before we add trespassing to the list." Coleman's jaw tightened, but he turned and walked back to his car without another word. Victory in sight. As the convoy of vehicles disappeared into the night, the tension in the room finally eased. Daniels placed a hand on John's shoulder. "You did good today. Bella and her pups will be safe thanks to you." John nodded, his gaze drifting back to Bella. "This isn't over, though." "No," Daniels agreed, "but it's a start." As the night deepened, the small group gathered in the back room. Bella and her puppies were finally sleeping peacefully, Buddy nestled securely against his siblings. For the first time in days, John felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The air around Rachel's place was different in the days following the confrontation. Bella and her puppies, especially Buddy, were finally safe, but the work to ensure justice for them, and countless others, was far from over. John Carter, who had once felt like just another lost soul on the highway, now found himself deeply intertwined with something much bigger than he ever imagined. The aftermath. Detective Mark Daniels spent the next several days using the evidence from Bella and her pups to build a stronger case against Golden Paws. The video footage, the collar's marking, and Bella's condition were all crucial in tying the operation to a larger illegal network. Rachel's viral social media post continued to gain attention, and soon, news outlets picked up the story. The small gas station became a hub for reporters and activists alike. "You've started something big," Daniels told Rachel one evening as they reviewed more reports coming in from concerned citizens. "People are finally paying attention." Rachel glanced toward the back room where Bella was resting with her puppies. "It's not just about attention," she said quietly. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Buddy's recovery. Buddy, the smallest of Bella's pups, continued to show signs of improvement. He still required special care, frequent feedings and checkups, but his tiny frame began to fill out, and his playful personality emerged. John couldn't help but smile every time Buddy wobbled around on unsteady legs, trying to keep up with his siblings. "You're a fighter, aren't you, little guy?" John said one evening, gently scratching behind Buddy's ears. The puppy responded with a tiny bark, his tail wagging furiously. Bella, ever the protective mother, watched with calm eyes. She had regained some of her strength, her golden coat beginning to shine again with proper care and nutrition. It was clear she trusted John completely, often leaning into him when he sat beside her. A community rallies. The community around Rachel's place began to take notice of the effort to help Bella and her pups. Donations of food, blankets, and money poured in, many accompanied by heartfelt notes. One family dropped off a handmade bed for the puppies, while another donated enough funds to cover Buddy's ongoing medical care. James Wilson, the station's mechanic, transformed part of his garage into a temporary shelter for abandoned animals. "Figured if people are paying attention now, we'd better give them something to do about it," he said with a grin as he added the finishing touches to the space. Rachel used her platform to organize volunteers and create a network for rescuing and fostering animals in need. "This isn't just about Bella anymore," she told John one evening. "This is about every animal that's been abandoned or mistreated." John nodded. "Feels good to be doing something that matters." A tough decision. One morning, Detective Daniels arrived with news that Golden Paw's case was heading to court. The evidence they had collected, combined with testimonies from whistleblowers and new information from the public, was enough to bring charges against the organization's leaders. But the process would take time, and Daniels needed Bella and her puppies as key witnesses. "They're the strongest piece of evidence we have," Daniels explained. "We'll need to move them to a secure location for a while, just until the case is settled." John felt his stomach drop. The thought of letting Bella and her pups go, even temporarily, was harder than he expected. They had become a part of his life, a part of his healing. Rachel noticed his hesitation. "They'll be safe, John, and you've done so much already." "I know," John said, his voice low. "It just feels like saying goodbye." A new chapter. The day Bella and her puppies left for the secure shelter was bittersweet. The small group gathered in the gas station's back room to see them off. Rachel gave Bella one last pat on the head, while James handed over a box of supplies for the trip. John knelt beside Bella, his hand resting gently on her back. "You'll be okay, girl," he said softly. And when this is all over, you'll have a home waiting for you, I promise." Bella nuzzled his hand, her tail wagging faintly. Buddy let out a tiny bark as if to say goodbye, his siblings following suit. As the van carrying Bella and her pups pulled out of the lot, John stood beside Rachel and James, watching until it disappeared from sight. A new purpose. In the weeks that followed, John threw himself into the work of helping other animals in need. He began making shorter regional routes with his truck, allowing him more time to volunteer at the makeshift shelter James had built. He even started fostering a few dogs, providing them with the love and care they needed before finding them permanent homes. Rachel's network grew, with more people stepping up to support the cause. The gas station became a symbol of hope, its walls adorned with photos of rescued animals and thank you notes from new pet owners. For John, life no longer felt like an endless highway. It was a journey with purpose, one that filled the emptiness he had carried for so long. A reunion. 6 months later, John received a call from Detective Daniels. The case against Golden Paws had been won, and Bella and her pups were ready to come home. John didn't hesitate. He drove straight to the shelter, his heart pounding with anticipation. When Bella saw him, her entire body wagged with excitement. She ran to him, her golden coat shining in the afternoon sun. Her puppies, now healthy and playful, tumbled after her, their tails wagging furiously. John knelt down, letting Bella nuzzle into his chest. "Welcome home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Buddy, now a strong and energetic pup, jumped onto John's lap, licking his face. John laughed, the sound filled with joy he hadn't felt in years. As he drove back to Rachel's place with Bella and her pups in the back seat, John felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he knew exactly where he was going, and he wasn't going alone.